You know how some games have the character do things that you can never actually do? Surfing on enemies? Yup. Shooting downward in the air? Uh-huh. Using a motorcycle as a weapon? Okay, not that, but you get what I mean. About damn time! Devil May Cry 4 was the last main Devil May Cry game, and it came out in 2008. Given how divisive it was at the time, it made sense that things needed to change. Unfortunately, that change was the reboot. The series seemed pretty much dead. However, at E3 2018, Devil May Cry 5 was announced after a decade of no real Devil May Cry game. Now that the game is out, was the wait worth it? Now this review will be full of spoilers for the whole game, so you have been warned. With all that said, let's rock, baby. So the story of DMC5 is interesting. The tone is way more serious than previous entries, but it does not forget to keep it fun and not too serious, and balances them pretty well. As for the narrative, the story takes place in medias res, before we learn more info through flashbacks. A demonic tree has emerged in Redgrave City, and Dante is fighting some new demon king. Nero then enters, and with a missing arm and with another person named V. They try to fight out the new villain, Urizen, but Dante and Nero both fail. Nero and V retreat, and Dante is presumed missing or dead. Now using his new slew of robo-arms, Nero and V must work together to defeat Urizen and stop the demon infestation. The story is actually good. Not too much progress is made in terms of character development or huge revelations, but it doesn't really need any. Most of the characters are established and are just doing what they can to stop this threat. Nothing ever really feels like padding, and the pacing of the story is so well done that it just all flows so well. Virgil contemplating how things would be if he and Dante's roles were reversed is an interesting thought and a good look into Virgil's psyche. Plus, Devil May Cry is the only series I can think of that has retcons that make sense and barely, if ever, contradict anything, and it helps tie 5 game narratives all together in a satisfying way. There actually aren't too many problems with the story, but there are some things I want to bring attention to. The entire plot happens mostly because Virgil is a sore loser. Seriously. He is so sick of always losing to Dante that he decides to abandon his humanity and become a full demon that is strong enough to kill Dante once and for all. Basically, everything would have been fine if Virgil just took the L for good. But that means we get Virgil back, so that's good! Plus, how exactly Virgil is back from the dead in the first place is not explained in the game nor the prequel novel, so that is a bit of a plot hole. But that's really the only big problem. V being Virgil's human side is interesting, even if some parts of it don't add up. Besides one cutscene in the special edition of 3, we never really see Virgil as a bookworm, especially for William Blake of all people. And does Virgil like classical music and dancing like he's in a show tune? I guess it adds some more layers and personality to Virgil, but it just seems a little weird. But there are subtle hints throughout the game to who V is before it is revealed, so it is not completely out of left field. But there are just so many awesome moments in the story as well that all these problems can be forgotten easily. Such as Dante getting his own demon sword, Dante versus Virgil, and Nero finally getting a real devil trigger! It's not the most amazing story in fiction. In fact, it's pretty basic, but when it comes to Devil May Cry, it's definitely one of the better ones. The graphics and aesthetics in this game are really good. The photorealism of the faces seems weird at first, but once you get past that, you see how good everything looks. The clothing and the weapons and the enemy design are all just so good looking. The lighting in this game is fantastic, the environments look detailed as shit, and later ones really give you that feeling of being in hell. The color palette may be a bit muted, but it does not hinder anything. So the look of the game is really good. The gameplay. Just gonna say it right now, it's fucking fun as shit! Here are the general controls that are universal for all 3 characters. You have a single attack button, a ranged attack button, a jump, and a special attack button. It may not seem like much, but it can get crazy in depth. You also have a lock-on, which not only lets you keep your eyes on a single opponent, but is necessary for quite a lot of moves to be performed. I originally was not fond of it back in Devil May Cry 3, but either it is better now, or I've gotten more used to it, but it's good now. Each character also has a devil trigger, but I'll get into that. Now to get down to the nitty-gritty and talk about all three characters. Strap in, this may take a while. Nero, in general, is more or less how he was in DMC4. He uses Red Queen for melee and can rev it up to give him a quick burst of power. Blue Rose is his gun and is slow, but powerful. Where things change aesthetically is Nero's Wire Snatch, since the grab functionally works the same way as the grab that the Bringer does in 4, in that you can bring things closer to you or you to them. Where things change gameplay-wise is with Nero's Devil Breakers. Since his Devil Bringer gets pulled off, he now has a multitude of robo-arms as a substitute. I really like the Devil Breakers. They give Nero way more variety in combat since he is not limited to just the Bringer like in 4. There are quite a few breakers to choose from, and having multiple attacks and multiple uses for said attacks is great for mixing things up. So when you seamlessly go from grabbing an enemy to launching them, shooting them in the air, grabbing them again, and using a breaker, it is so cool and satisfying, and it makes you feel like you did a lot, even when that's a stupidly basic thing to do. I do have some problems with his gameplay style, though. The button that breaks his breakers is the same button as Devil Trigger for the other two, so muscle memory might make you accidentally break an arm you didn't want to break. Then when Nero gets his own Devil Trigger, it's activated using the D-pad. Probably the most badass and simultaneously weirdest use of a D-pad I've ever seen. He gets his Devil Bringer back, which unnecessarily gives him two methods of grabbing opponents, and his Buster move back, which makes his Buster Devil Bringer completely pointless. But those are really the only problems. His combo potential may be the hardest to get to Triple S, but he is still a fun character to play. V is the new character in this, and his playstyle is not only unique for this game, but one of the most unique I've played in an action game. He's pretty much a ranged fighter only. V can't fight enemies and is pretty weak. He can only finish them off. So he uses Griffin for projectiles, Shadow for melee, and Nightmare for his Devil Trigger, and all of them fight in his stead. Yeah, his Devil Trigger gives him a new ally on the field instead of directly powering himself up. Essentially, you are controlling anywhere from 3 to 4 characters all at once, which is why he can be tricky to play as. You can also charge your Devil Trigger manually in combat and keep the Devil Trigger going longer if you charge while in Devil Trigger. So you're essentially also pressing many buttons at once. Because of all these factors, he's the easiest to get a triple S rank in, but one of the more complex to control. While I did like this style in general, he is my least favorite to play as. He can do combos, but it doesn't feel as satisfying since you're doing them from afar even if you are in control. It's the equivalent of watching someone playing a fun game instead of playing a fun game. One is way more enjoyable to do. But V overall, though, is unique, fun, and makes my hands cramp. So many painful hand cramps. Finally, Dante. Dante in this game is more or less how he was in 4, but due to his new weapons, feels vastly different. He has access to styles, which change certain aspects of his moveset. Trickster, which gives him better dodging and movement options. Swordmaster, which gives him more moves to his melee weapons. Gunslinger, which gives him more options for his ranged weapons. And Royal Guard, which allows him to guard and parry. Already it's quite a lot, but Dante gets even more weapons throughout the game. His main swords, Rebellion and Sparta, more or less work the same, but his third sword, Dante, is pretty much in permanent Swordmaster style. So when you have the sword equipped and use Swordmaster, he takes a page out of his brother's William Blake book and uses summon swords to aid him in battle. Balrog can switch between a boxing style and a capoeira style for attacks. Cavalier can switch between being a motorcycle and 2 buzz saws. Cerberus returns from 3 but is upgraded now. You have the usual ice nunchucks, but also a fire staff and an electric chain? I don't know what that one is. Ebony and Ivory are his standard pistols. Coyote A is his sawed-off shotgun. He has the Kalina and rocket launcher, in which you can also find another one, and dual-wield rocket launchers! Dr. Faust uses red orbs for ammo. He also has Devil Trigger as normal, but now has access to Sin Devil Trigger, which pretty much makes you a playable boss. His combo potential is insane, and is personally my favorite to play as. I really don't have anything to say beyond the surface level descriptors I just listed. He's just so fun and has a shit ton of moves at his disposal. Dante is probably the most fleshed out in this game and has one of if not the most, in-depth combat systems probably ever. The combat in this game is so good, even if I may not personally be the best at it. The music in this game is 99% really good. The soundtrack is fairly varied, from orchestrated moments to slow and emotional pieces, but most of the soundtrack is electronic rock. It all sounds so good and pumps you up no matter the fight. Each character also gets their own battle theme, which gets louder and longer the better the style ranking, which is great. Nero's theme is Devil Trigger, which is fantastic and the best character song in the game. I do not get sick of hearing it, and the remixes you can hear at other points in the game are still good. V's theme, Crimson Cloud, at first sounds too edgy, but it fits more in battle since V's gameplay is slower, so a slower song works well. Plus, just how it sounds matches V's visual design. If you notice the 99% good thing I mentioned, it's because, unfortunately, that 1% is Dante's battle theme, Subhuman. Whether it was the original Screamo version or the newer version giving it more of a heavy metal vibe with a new singer, I think that Subhuman just isn't good, which is why you're hearing music from Devil May Cry 3 instead. The instrumentals are actually really good, and the song relates to Dante, but just something about the way it's sung is just bad. It's a bit unfortunate, but the rest of the soundtrack is great anyway. The level design is pretty basic, but it works for this game. There are areas to explore and it is not incredibly linear, but the level usually goes from A to B, but with combat and minimal platforming and exploration. The game is not set in one area that you have to travel and backtrack through constantly. Each level is unique in its own way. Even the levels you revisit from earlier parts in the game look and function way differently. And each character gets their own levels, so no Devil May Cry 4 shenanigans going on here. The level design works well enough in this game, and I enjoy going through each more than I thought I would, again, despite the basicness of it. There are some little things I like in this game that I just want to talk about really quick. The in-game files are not only incredibly informative, but a cool little addition to learn more about enemies, weapons, characters, and Morrison's relation to Dante. This game also has a character model viewer, which is something that I always love and I don't see much of anymore. It's cool to see all the details of the models, especially with the great character and enemy design. In combat, after Nero or Dante stop using their swords, they hold it out for a bit, unlike previous games where they immediately put it on their back. It's just a little detail that I like. Finally, those phone booth cutscenes are cartoony as shit and incredibly over the top and stupid, and I love each and every one I see. The final part deals with the bosses, of course. I just first want to say that there are no bad bosses in this game. Sure, maybe some aren't to the quality of others, and some may be cheap at times, but not a single one is bad at all. There was never a boss that I feared fighting due to a bad gimmick or bad boss pattern design. In fact, the boss patterns are tough but fair. They all have great designs, and their patterns are great as well. I've never played a game where I enjoyed each boss, since you always have those that you hate fighting on replays, but not here. I would never say they are objectively the best in gaming, but I do think that they are all terrific in multiple ways. There's even something akin to a boss rush in this game that I actually like. Not only is it only 3 bosses as opposed to every single boss, they are in a different environment and you play as V facing bosses that either Nero or Dante face, so it feels different as well. That is great, and I'm glad I have no problem with it since I am not usually fond of mandatory boss rushes. Of course, they are not perfect though. Most of them lack the personality and memorability of some previous bosses in the series. It will definitely make it difficult to remember them all down the line since they don't show off all that much. The fights with Urizen try to be like the Virgil fights in 3, where you do fight him multiple times and the fight does evolve each time, but it just does not work due to Urizen having no charm despite the awesome design. And not to mention the overabundance of projectiles can be a bit much. When you do fight Virgil, it is way more fun due to the familiarity and fight design, and I love these kinds of fights. It is also a great way to cap off the Sons of Sparta saga. However, I do still feel it is weaker than how he was done in 3. Virgil was such an imposing figure in that game, and his constant presence made you aware of that. Plus, the fight evolution was great, and his story arc with Dante was terrific. Here, while it's great that he's back and his fight is still fun, not only is the dynamic evolution gone, but he himself isn't technically in the game for long, and he doesn't leave a lasting impression. He's here to please fans. That's really about it. His interactions with Dante and Nero are great though, so can't knock that. It's still great he's here, but it does feel forced this time around. Despite some of the problems, the bosses are superb. Overall, this game is way better than I think anyone was ever expecting. It has some snags here or there that keep it from being a perfect game, but it comes damn close. I have no doubt that not only is this one of the greatest action games ever made, but quite possibly one of the greatest games ever made. Period. I give this game a 9.5 out of 10. The devil you know returns, and it's gonna get crazy!
Don't you dare say it, jackpot!
Nothing ever really feels like padding, and the pacing of the story is so well done that it's all just this script is so long, and I know I'm going to be messing up throughout it. Fun times. Okay, let's go again. There aren't too many problems, but there are some things I want to bring attention to. The entire plot happens. The graphics and aesthetics of... Okay, let's try that again and not mess up on such a simple fucking line. He's pretty much a ranged fighter only. V can't fight enemies and is pretty weak. Oh, shit, okay. You ever have those moments when you're reading your script and you don't even realize what the fuck you wrote? Or like you have like some parentheses here that like you try to skip over to make sure you don't talk on them? Boy, this is I'm having a lot of mess ups with this script already. Okay, alright. The game is not set in one area that you have to travel and back to the future. They all have great designs, and their patterns are not only great as well, but the design of the bosses are good too. I've never played a game where I've enjoyed each boss, and each design is so good. Oh, okay, God. Oh, okay. This is why you need to reread your script and keep editing it, because I just mentioned how good designs are 3 times. They all have great designs, and the designs are good. I enjoyed each boss, and their designs are great. God. Always edit, kids, and teens, and young adults, and anyone listening, and I don't know, I'm just rambling. Alright, whatever.